By now, we all know the formula for a classic farming sim. You get word that a relative of yours has died and has left you their farm, and you fill your days with farming, mining, and making friendships as you start a brand new life in this new town. Well, Farming Sim 23 is nothing like that. And honestly, it's such a breath of fresh air to have a farming sim that is completely different to all the classics on the Nintendo Switch. Now, I must admit, when Farming Sim 23 asked to sponsor this video, I was more than a bit uncertain. I have already tried farming sim games before, and have honestly felt nothing but pretty overwhelmed. But once I started to play Farming Sim 23, I realised that it's not quite the same as the other farming sims I've played before. In fact, it's actually a pretty stripped back version of a farming sim, and I love it. I know many may see it as a negative for people who are well versed in the farming sim genre to have a stripped back version of the game, but for me, someone brand new to this genre, this was actually a really great first experience. Now, the nice thing about career mode in Farming Sim 23 is it really has everything to get you started. It gives you the option to do a tutorial, which is pretty basic but still useful, but it also gives you all the equipment you need to get going. Not only do you get 3 tractors to start off with, you also get given the tools to plow, sow seeds, and also harvest the crops. Not only that, they also give you a way to transport them, and you start off with £100,000 to begin with, so whatever you don't have, you can also buy. And they're even generous enough to throw in some chickens as well. Now, I must admit, for the first 3 or so hours that I played it, I was pretty content with everything it'd given me, and I was just living my best life, tractoring up and down while watching some TV. That's the way I normally play a simulation game, so it's honestly what I expected. With the gameplay loop being pretty simple, you plow the land, you plant the seeds, you wait for them to grow, and then you take a look at which shop is paying the most for the crops and sell them. And the way it's set up is each in-game day is actually an entire month. Now, if you're used to the more slow-paced, life-simmy farming sims, that may seem really daunting, but when this is a more realistic approach to crops and crop management, it actually makes sense and isn't as fast-paced as it sounds. The game also gives you some useful settings to help you out with. Like, for example, you can fine-tune the exact length of every single in-game day. So what I ended up doing was I had it pretty quick to begin with, and then as I grew my farm more and more and had more to do each day, then I slowed it down a little bit more. But after a few hours of playing in this simplistic method, it wasn't long before I realized that there was actually so much more to the game than just that gameplay loop. And although you can play the game like that and just enjoy the chill experience of driving around in tractors, I was making enough money to buy more crops and it was perfectly fine, you can also turn this into an entire management game. Now, if you really dive deep into it, there's 4 main areas. You've got farming, animal care, processing, and then also forestry or logging. The farming side we've already kind of touched on, but let's get into it in more detail. At the beginning of the game, you start off with 3 small fields. However, as you can see from the map, you can expand massively. And you might realize that after you start expanding your farm, you're actually going to need some help. Because after all, you can only sit in 1 tractor at a time. So this is where you can hire AI helpers to come assist you. They essentially man a tractor for you and will basically finish whatever tasks you set for them. So for example, if you begin harvesting crops from a field and press A, the AI will finish off the field for you. Now, I know on the news at the moment, there's a lot of talk about AI taking over the world and destroying humans. Don't worry, these AI will definitely not be the ones that do that, okay? These AI are definitely not the smartest. They really struggle to go around objects that are in their way, and I've often seen them crash into each other. And sometimes if you start the field off in a weird way, they will just do some really wild things to try and figure out how to cover the entire field. But the way I enjoyed playing the game was to make maximum usage of the AI. Now, it is worth bearing in mind you do have to pay them for their help, but it really isn't a lot in the grand scheme of things, so I think it's worth it. And the way it works is that every single tractor you own could effectively have an AI in charge of it, and the way I kind of managed my day was I would start off a field myself and then get the AI to do the rest. That way I could ensure everything was running smoothly and I knew exactly what was going on when. And as I expanded more, I could buy more tractors, which meant I could have more AI in each tractor at the same time. This way, I didn't need to be in a tractor all the time doing it myself, so I could focus on making the farm efficient and maximizing the yield. It's really when you start getting into these things that you realize how technical you could make this game if you really wanted to. My first 5 or so hours, I really wasn't aware of any of these mechanics, and I did perfectly fine. But if you did want to maximize yield, then you need to make sure that every single time you plant a crop, that you spray it with weed killer and also fertilize the soil twice. And if you do them both successfully, then you get an 80% boost to your harvest. So in my opinion, it was definitely worth the extra effort. Now, every time you harvest your crops, you have the decision to either keep them in storage or to sell them immediately. And once you have a look on the purchasing side of the menu, you'll realize that each crop has a time in the year where it sells for the most, and also a time in the year that it sells for the least amount of money. So I kind of planned my harvests around what time of the year it was to really maximize my sales at that time in the month. It is worth noting though, if you sell too much of the same crop all at once, you'll flood the market and cause the prices to plummet, which I think is a nice addition as it really gets you to think and plan just a little bit more. Now, when it comes to maximizing the efficiency of your farm, this is where you come to this menu where you can buy more expensive equipment. I personally can't drive, I don't know the first thing about cars, let alone all these tractors with all these things that you can add onto them. But the nice thing is the game kind of assumes that, so in the menu you can press Y at any point and it will tell you what each piece of equipment is and what the machinery can be used for. And the way I made things more efficient was I got this contraption that plows, plants seeds and fertilizes all in one go, making things an awful lot easier. In my playthrough, I mostly just stuck to the basic seeds, but if you really want to get into it and get further through the game, then you can also tackle things like corn, potatoes, and hay that all have their own specific equipment that you need to deal with, different to all the other basic crops. Then we have animal care. Now, I personally, the way I played this, didn't dive too deep into the animal care, but alongside the chickens, you can also have cows, horses, sheep, and pigs. Each of the animals have their own food requirements that you will need to grow on your farm, and some of them will need a bit of preparation as well. Like for example, if their main food is hay, you'll have to prepare that from growing grass yourself and then drying it and rolling it into barrels. Each of the animals will make you money in different ways. For example, the horses you can just train and sell on for a profit, cows make milk, chickens make eggs, and sheep make wool. And with both of the farming goods and the animal goods, you have 2 decisions to make. You can either sell them as is for a profit, but to really make more money, you need to process the goods further. But in order to process the goods, you have to buy facilities first. Like for example, if you have a ton of wheat, you can either sell it as is for a profit, or you can buy the local grain factory and process that wheat into flour. If you want even more of a profit though, you could also buy the bakery and turn the flour into bread. That's one of the more basic production lines. You can also do one in the bakery that's baking cakes, and that requires flour, eggs, butter, all of which you have to process in different plants to then bring to that one bakery to make cakes. But as you can guess, the more effort you put in, the higher your profit margins. The processing part of the game was, to me, the fun part. The main thing I enjoyed doing personally was going around the town, transporting all the goods, setting up the productions, and seeing the money grow month on month as I got more successful. And although this might seem overwhelming when I'm explaining it to you, you progress in the game really slowly, so it really doesn't feel that overwhelming as you take on more of a workload. And I more or less just oversaw the AI army and kind of kept track of everything rather than me physically doing all of the farming myself. That way I kind of had TV on in the background, the game in my hands, doing it like that. There are other ways to play this, like for example, you could just focus primarily on the animal care and making your whole farm revolve around giving the animals the right food. Or you could also focus on the forestry side of things and kind of ignore the farm and the animals altogether with that. Now, whilst I had a lot of fun with the game, there are definitely some negatives. I think the biggest negative is definitely the graphics. Now, I know the Nintendo Switch is not the most powerful system, but especially in handheld, the graphics really do fall short. Like, at some points I feel like the game just straight up looked a bit blurry. The other way in which the game slightly lets you down is the tutorial system. And although it covers the very, very basics well, it doesn't really get into the fun stuff at all. Like, for example, I had a big issue figuring out the production chains. When you want to buy a field, all you do is go to the map, click on the field you want to buy, and it brings you up the menu where you can purchase it. But what I didn't realize is if you wanted to purchase a factory, you had to drive all the way over to the factory, find a really sometimes hidden little menu system that you went to, activated that, and it gave you the option to buy. Not only was that not really explicitly written, I also found that there really isn't that many guides on Google, and because of the lack of guides, sometimes you can get properly stuck. This is definitely a game where you would need to put in hundreds of hours, most likely, to unlock the entire map and have that going at once, because money making, especially at the start, was surprisingly slow, especially as the game doesn't explain a lot of the good ways to make money to you. I also wish the AI was just maybe a little bit smarter. As funny as it is sometimes to watch the chaos unfold in front of you, sometimes it would be nice if they just kind of worked and didn't need to be looked after quite so much. But as I said before, one of the things I love about this the most is it's really a stripped back version of the classic farming sim genre. And for that reason, it's the first one I've really managed to get into and learn, which means hopefully when I go back to some of the more complicated ones, I will do a lot better. So in my opinion, if you've never tried a farming sim game and you can look past the graphics, this might be a great first one to get to grips with. Even if you do find yourself Googling a bit more than you wanted to. Thank you again to Farming Sim 23 for sponsoring today's video. And if you want to see the best upcoming games for June, click this video here.